Hello, welcome back to the HIPAA Insider Show. I'm Adam Z, and joining me as always is our esteemed HIPAA expert, Gil Vidals. Gil, great to have you back.
Hey, Adam, it's been a little while. We skipped a couple episodes during the summertime, but now we're back.
Yeah, I hope you had a great summer.
Yeah, things went well. Yeah, September's here, and whether we like it or not, it's time to get back to the desk.
So, Gil, a few months ago now, it might have even been almost a year ago, we did an episode on Google, Gemini, and HIPAA compliance. And we talked about how using it requires a Google Workspace account with BAA access, so a paid Google Workspace account, so that there's a specific access through a compliant portal for the use of Gemini. And that episode kind of got us thinking, and today wants to expand on LLMs. And I guess the first question we could talk about is what the fundamental difference between using an LLM like Gemini or ChatGPT as a service, like we discussed with Gemini, versus, let's say, a healthcare organization or a healthcare adjacent organization deciding to host the LLM on their own infrastructure or cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a good topic, Adam. I think that's something that the audience would be leaning forward to hear about that. So let's start with the basics. The LLM stands for Large Language Model. That's what these generative intelligence, generative AI is based on, are these large language modules. So the question we want to talk about today is, okay, great. These things are very useful. Everybody's using ChatGPT and Gemini and Copilot and all of that. So if you're going to use it for PHI data, protected health information, what does that mean? Is it safe? Is it not safe? So this is a great topic, Adam. I'm really glad you brought it up. So essentially, we have the public-facing LLMs. The most popular one is ChatGPT. I think I forgot what the next most popular one. I know Gemini's up there. So is Claude. Claude's very popular. Yeah. So those are some of the big boys, right, that are playing in this new generative AI space. So you have the public-facing one. Those are the ones most people are used to hearing about, and they have everything in their data center in the cloud, right? It's their servers, their network, their machines, their infrastructure. And they're handling all of the LLM and everything to do about it. You don't really have anything to do other than you're using it, right? You're prompting it. So they're handling all the underlying infrastructure, physical security, and your responsibility as a covered entity is to ensure that your usage is for your policies abides and goes and works in tandem with the policies of these public providers. And I think we mentioned before, Adam, if you're using a paid version or a free version, you may have come across some information about that, the free version and the paid version.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's almost become a cliche now, but in general, the guidance when it comes to using software, cloud-based software, is if it's free, then you're the product. If that makes sense. So if you're not paying for it, then somehow the company that's developing it has got to turn a profit. Otherwise, it wouldn't be around. So likely, if it's a free version of something that's being hosted by the software developer, like a free Gemini or like a free Gmail, or insert other popular product here, then likely there's no guarantees that your data isn't being used for other purposes that you haven't necessarily, you don't have knowledge of. You might have agreed to it in a user agreement somewhere, but yeah, if it's free, likely your data is the product. So that's why we generally encourage with any of these services to go for the paid version. Like whether it's Gmail, go for a paid Google Workspace, or if it's Gemini, to also go for a paid Gemini subscription. So yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing about that. Do you have any?
Generally speaking, you're right. That's a great rule of thumb. So if you're talking about WordPress plugins, you have to pay for them. You shouldn't use the free plugin, because if you use that, you don't get the updates on a regular basis. You mentioned Gmail. You don't want the free Gmail because you get better product. And with the enterprise workspace, it has all the security features, and you need all of that when you're dealing with protected health information. So the same kind of thinking goes into this approach as well. If you're going to use one of these public-facing tools like ChatGPT, you should pay for the $20 license, or you can buy the team version, which means you buy one person's the administrator, they buy all the licenses for all the team members. So we highly recommend that. Once you do that, then you could read carefully their privacy policy. They have a privacy policy. Once you pay, you can go and click on it, see it, read it, make sure it aligns with your internal policies that you have for your HIPAA data. Now that's on the public facing. Now, the other thing you mentioned at the start of this conversation, Adam, is what about hosting it yourself? So the audience may not be aware of this because all these things are happening pretty recently. So the large language module that we talked about, or large language model, is something that has now gotten to the point where you can download to a server some of this generative AI platform. You could download it to a server and use it there locally. Okay, so that's a whole different model. That means you're taking the software, you're taking the application, and you're downloading it to a server that you control that's in your environment. Now, that has advantages and it has disadvantages. The advantages are that you control that the usage of that. It's in your network on your server. And so now you're responsible for it, but you can make sure that it's not sending data out, it's not sharing, you're not going to share the data with anyone. So you can download the LLM to your server and then use it in a localized and private and secure manner. So that's the advantage. The disadvantage, well, is that now you've got to manage the server and keep it HIPAA compliant, and that takes a lot of work,
right?
Because you have to have physical cameras, you have to have, most of these servers are behind a cage with an access code, and they even have guards in the front, and nobody's going to really, unless if it's a small project, you're not going to want to invest that kind of money. Now, if it's a bigger project, maybe you are. Maybe you already have your own data center. Maybe you already have your own racks of servers. Maybe you already have your own access code. If you already have all of that in place, and now you're just adding a new server and putting an LLM on that server, then it could be worth it, because you're like, this is perfect. I don't have additional costs. I'm already paying for all this infrastructure. So that's something to think about. So again, the advantage is that you can control the security and the privacy. You're not going to leak out that information from your own server. You're going to do everything you can to keep it in there. So that could be advantageous.
Okay. When it comes to the HIPAA requirements for each of these, if you like, types of service that we've discussed, the free, the paid, SaaS-based, Gemini, versus then the final one, the self-hosted. What should an organization be looking for in terms of looking out on the HIPAA side for? I mean, we've already discussed on the free, that's generally not recommended. So I guess it would be the difference between the compliance posture of when you're using a SaaS tool versus the compliance posture where you're doing, manually installing software and managing the hosting of it.
Yeah, that's now we're getting into the nitty gritty and the details. Yeah. So I think we need to take a step back and think about how these LLMs work, right? If the audience is going to be aware of these now. They're using them hopefully by now they're using them because they're very helpful. They help speed up your productivity and your works. And that's true in the medical field as well as it is in the IT field. So how do you interface with the LLM? Well, you get your laptop and you type or you speak through your microphone a prompt. And that prompt is then digested by the LLM. But that prompt itself, you have to think, well, where does that go? Well, it goes into the LLM. But if it's a public-facing company, what do they do with that prompt? Now, their privacy policies will discuss that. They'll tell you what they do with it. Sometimes they say, we're going to use your prompt the information that you provide, which could have PHI data if you're talking about a patient of Dr. Smith and the disease he had and so on, that data, they may say, well, we're going to use that to train our model, to further train it and enhance it. That could be a problem. Or I know we were reading the Gemini policy. If you're paying for it, as far as I remember now, the policy said they won't use that prompting data to train the model. It's not going to be absorbed into their model and incorporated. So that would be better if you're.
And that's to date in September 2025. Who knows where that goes?
That could change. You need to keep up with that, and it's changing rapidly, as everybody in this call knows. Things change. So that's something you need to be fully aware of. Is the prompt itself is where the PHI data would be contained if you're using LLM to help you in your organization, the work you do, handling PHI data. So that's the first principle. The other things beyond that really depend on if you're going to be, again, as we mentioned earlier, downloading your own AI model onto your own infrastructure, or if you're just going to use the public infrastructure that's already there, like if you're just going to go use a public facing one. Now, the one thing that we didn't talk about, Adam, is if you already have, we mentioned if you already have your own data center, you already have your own physical servers, but you could be in the cloud. Let's say you have your own handful of servers in the Google Cloud. That's kind of a hybrid model, because if you think about it, your virtual machines are hosted, let's say at Google as an example. So you have your server at Google, right, in the cloud. You made a virtual machine. That's still your own area, though. Even though you're paying Google the monthly bill, that's still your area. You manage it. You're using Google security, which is HIPAA compliant, and then you're doing your part of maintaining HIPAA compliance on your virtual machine. Because remember, in the conversations we've had many times, even if you're hosted in a HIPAA compliant cloud environment like Google, they don't make your own virtual machines HIPAA compliant. They don't touch those. That's where they draw the line. That virtual machine is yours. You have to do your part. So now you download the LLM onto that virtual machine, assuming you're doing all the things you're supposed to do to maintain that virtual machine HIPAA compliant, then it would be okay. That would be a bad one. And then, Adam, when we download or use an LLM locally, that means we apply it onto the server itself. We got to be careful. Where did we get it? Are you going to use DeepSeek from China? Are you going to grab a Chinese-made LLM? Or are you going to get an open source one where many developers from all around the world are contributing and making that? Or are you going to get one from a vendor that you're going to buy? So you have to be careful and consider the implications of all of those choices. So I think that's another important consideration.
Definitely. So it's not truly like a do-it-yourself when it comes to the self-hosted. Well, actually, it might be a do-it-yourself if the company is installing the software on the public cloud servers. Could you talk a little bit about how the MSP comes into play? Like an MSP like HIPAA Vault when trying to set this up.
Yeah, if you have to use an LLM for your healthcare application, and many applications are taking advantage of AI, but you don't want to hassle with the infrastructure. Like, you know what, I know I'm going to use LLM XYZ, right? I found a great one that's been trained by a company that I'm buying or by the open source community. I want to use this particular one. I'm going to download it and put it on my own server. Then you can come to HIPAA Vault, a plug for ourselves, other MSPs like us, but it has to be a HIPAA compliant MSP like HIPAA Vault. Then what we would do is we would build the infrastructure for you where you could place that LLM. So your infrastructure is going to be HIPAA compliant, so you could check that box. But then again, as we said earlier, whatever application you're building with your developers, you're going to have to make sure that they are following the security best practices for your application. But if you do that, then that's kind of the best practices all around. That would be a good, solid foundation for you to launch your LLM-based application.
Okay. So would you agree with this broad generalization? For small to medium-sized healthcare organizations, maybe even startups using LLM as a service, as long as it's reputable and there's a business associate agreement, could be a good approach. And then for maybe a more complex type of project, whether it's an enterprise level healthcare organization or a startup that is starting up on the basis that we're doing something very niche and specific with the LLM, then they should explore the self-hosted option.
Yeah, I think, like you said, generally speaking, that's a good one. The one piece that we left out, which I think is going to be the most popular, actually, if you're developing a healthcare app, you may choose to use an API. So in that case, you're using an API, which is a bridge, right? Your server's here and the LLM's over here. You can't see my hands, but you have to make a bridge. That bridge is the API. That's the bridge where your prompt flows through this bridge. It's accepted by the LLM. The LLM responds, and then it goes back to the API, back to your application. So the APIs we're talking about in Google is called Vertex AI. They have an entire ecosystem built around Gemini and their AI. So you don't have to download that LLM. You don't have to worry about it. They're HIPAA compliant depending on how you use it. And then you would just simply use an API to communicate with it. And that probably, from a programming point of view, that's much more in vogue. That's the state of the art. That's what people are doing today. Why would you want to then install or configure your own LLM on your own server? There are cases where the latency, where the time to communicate through the API tunnel is too long. It might take a second or two. And that your application, like speech to text or text to speech, you can't have 1 to 2 second delay. Not going to work. So then in those cases, you're forced to say, well, I need to have a local LLM. But if your application is not that critical in terms of speed, if speed and performance from that perspective is not that exact, then you could use just the API, and you don't have to worry about the speed as much. So it depends really on the application. But the API one is probably, the API option is probably the most popular one, I would say, for a healthcare developer.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great additional third option. I'm glad you brought that up, Gil. It's a really good advice. Anything else before we close?
No, I think that's it, and we're glad to be back from summer break, and we'll get back into our podcast. And thanks everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments below or email us at podcast@HIPAAVault.com. And until next time, thanks for stopping by.